Welcome back everyone to another NASCAR Heat 5 setup video. Today's video will focus on the Cup cars at Homestead Miami. Now this is a track that, while it might be a mile and a half in length, races very differently than the other mile and a halves on the schedule. So in today's video, we're not only going to talk setup, but we're going to talk about why it races so differently. Before we get into the setup discussion, there's a few other pieces of information that I wanted to pass along. First, be sure to check out the video I did talking about NASCAR Heat 4 setups in NASCAR Heat 5. In the video, I talk about whether or not these Heat 4 setups work in Heat 5, and also my approach to setups in NASCAR Heat 5. Next, let's talk about tire wear settings. I generally work with normal settings, so normal wear and normal tire wear fall off. And the reason I do that is so that we can get a very good baseline, which is the most important thing for me to pass along to you guys. That way, if you're using more aggressive tire wear settings, more wear, less grip as the tires wear, then you'll know that you need to tighten the car up some in order to save the tires, in particular the right rear. If you're using less aggressive settings, which would be less tire wear, more grip in the tires as they wear, then you know that you can get by with running a little bit looser setup. So using normal settings for both tire wear as well as grip fall off allows me to create that baseline. I do enjoy using the other settings, particularly having the more aggressive settings and less grip as the fall off happens, but I think normal on both tire wear and fall off gives us a very good baseline. Also, the focus of my setups is on stability. I don't focus so much on single lap speed or worry about single lap qualifying type speed. I'm more interested in the race and having a good car from the beginning of the run through the middle of the run and then finishing up the run strong as the fuel wears out. And then finally, when I'm doing setups for both Cup, Xfinity, as well as the trucks, I like to keep these as close to each other as possible so that it gives the same feel across all three series. In general, Xfinity and trucks run a little bit tighter for me using the same setup as I would use in the Cup cars. So in general, I'm going to loosen those up just a little bit in order to get the identical feel that I have with Cup. So with that out of the way, let's move into the setup. Before we hop into the setup discussion, let's first talk a little bit about this track. I mentioned that it drives very differently from most of the other mile and a halves in NASCAR, and there are a few different reasons for that. First is the shape. It's a standard oval shape instead of having a tri-oval or a D shape to it, so that means that your entry and exits to the corners at the different ends of the track are not as different as they might be on some slightly different shaped tracks. However, there's also some differences on corner entry and corner exit as to how you get into the banking and how the banking falls away on exit. There's some differences there, of course. Also, Homestead has the graduated banking, meaning that the banking actually increases as you go from the bottom of the track to the top, leaving more banking at the high side than at the low side. So there's several differences here, meaning that there's multiple grooves you can run around this track and still make speed. You can run right at the bottom, a traditional out against the wall on the straightaway, down to the bottom in the corners, or you can run in the middle of the track, and you can definitely run right up by the wall in the corners where there's the most banking. So a lot of different ways to get around this track. I would recommend spending some time practicing in each of the grooves, bottom, middle, and top in the corners, because during a race, whether you're around AI or other player cars, you're going to need to be able to move through traffic, and you're not going to be able to do that unless you can run multiple lines around the track. Also, this track can be very misleading in the tire temperatures and tire wear from the beginning to the end of a run. So what I mean by that is, for me, very early on in a run, it's very hard on the right front tire. So you're going to see a lot of wear, particularly if you're on 3 or 4X tire wear, you're going to see a lot of right front wear early on. But for me, this only lasts for a few laps, and then it really starts to equalize and go back in the other direction. Now, by the end of a full green flag run, a full fuel run, the right front still has more wear in it than the right rear. However, the balance does not indicate that at all. So another instance in this game where the tires are a little deceiving as to the balance overall of the car. So definitely look at both. Look at your tire wear. Make sure you're not wearing the right front out, but at the same time, make sure you give it plenty of laps before you make this determination. Don't just run, 4 or 5 laps and decide that you're just killing the right front. Pay attention to how the car feels and also give it a full fuel run before you make any determinations. So what we're going to look at for today as far as the setup goes, again, we're going to focus on the Cup car, but as I've mentioned in basically every video that I do like this, the same setup applies and works very well for Xfinity and Trucks. The difference being Xfinity and Trucks generally run a little bit tighter for me, so I make a few adjustments here and there to loosen the car up based on what we're going to talk about today. So this setup is what I would call a very stable baseline setup. There is plenty of room to get more speed out of this car by loosening it up, and we're going to talk about some of those areas where I can very quickly make adjustments and loosen the car and gain more single lap qualifying type speed. But what we're looking at is a very good baseline for a full fuel run. Starting with the shock settings, 10s across the board. Now you can certainly get much more exotic with that, tune corner by corner, but 10s across the board enable me to keep things very generic and also give me a little bit stiffer feel than I might otherwise have if I drop it down into the 3 to 5 or 5 to 7 range, particularly on the bump setting. Now, there are some bumps that you're going to notice off of the exit of corner number 2 if you get a little bit high. So if you're running the high line or you let the car drift out a little bit too high if you're running the bottom and you let it drift out too much on exit, particularly happens if you get back to the gas too hard and the car is pushing on exit, you can get up a little high, get into these bumps, and that can put you into the wall. But generally speaking, as long as you're not overdriving the car, shouldn't really be an issue with those bumps. But I did want to make you aware that those bumps do exist and can catch you off guard if you're not paying attention. But 10s across the board are a good baseline number. I prefer a little bit stiffer car at a place like this because I really want the car to rotate well through the center. So I might go up as high as about 15 on each of the 4 corners. And again, you can always adjust each corner of the car, but that's more of a personal preference thing, which is why I don't generally do that here in the setup videos. Now let's move on to the weight setting. We're going to be using maximum left side weight because we're on an oval, but then you notice that the front weight and wedge are both at 52%. I can certainly use lower on each of these numbers. However, there's a battle here between finding speed and losing a little bit of stability in the car. So I opt for the stability whenever there is a question, because the last thing I want to do is provide you guys with a setup that is extremely loose and unstable. So I prefer to back that down, make the car stable, and then let you guys work your way into it, make some adjustments, and make the car feel right for you. Front weight at 52% is a pretty good number. I could lower this down easily to about 51.5 or even 51.0, and the car would be okay. But based on some of the other things we're going to talk about today, as far as how to loosen the car and get more speed, that's where I need a little bit more front weight to keep that stability in the car. Overall, increasing the front weight will tighten up the car. It will slow down the rotation of the car and make the car more stable. Lowering the front weight adds rotation to the car, makes the car looser overall, but if you get it too low, it can cause instability in the car, particularly on corner entry and then through the center. With the wedge, increasing the wedge overall is going to tighten the car. It's going to slow down the speed of the rotation, meaning that as you're going on the entry of the corner and through the center of the corner, the car is not going to want to turn as quickly, meaning you're going to have to wait a little bit before getting back to the throttle. Obviously, there are other things we can do in the setup to combat that, but in general, the higher the wedge number, the more stable the car is going to feel. It's going to feel a lot more comfortable to drive. Lowering that wedge number will take some of that stability away, but it can allow the car to rotate quicker, particularly on entry and through the center. Okay, moving on now to the spring settings. We've got a stiffer left front spring than right front spring. The reason for that is that really helps the car to rotate on corner entry. So maximum left front spring helps the car to rotate. If we wanted to tighten up the car on corner entry, one of our options is to decrease the left front spring, which is certainly an option here. If you look at the right front spring, tightening the car up on corner entry means increasing the right front spring, and that will certainly tighten it up. If you want to loosen the car on corner entry, then lower the right front spring. In this case, I decided to lower the right front a little bit, but I didn't want to go too far. I actually tested out lower than 1,100 pounds, 1,000 pounds, 900 pounds, and so on. And it worked well. However, the lower you get the right front, when combined with the rest of the setup options we're using, it can cause some instability. The car wants to roll over on the right front, which can be a little bit weird to feel on corner entry and can make the car feel very unstable, like it wants to over-rotate. So I stopped at 1,100, but by all means, feel free to test going even lower than that on the right front. If you go lower, say 1,000 or 900 pounds on the right front, and the car starts to feel too unstable, then one of my suggestions would be come back over to the wedge and increase that to 52.5 or even 53 or higher, and that should help out some with that. Okay, now moving on to the rear springs, 50 pounds of split between the left rear and the right rear at 550 and 600. I tested using more split in the rear tires to help the car rotate through the center and on exit. However, I just didn't like the stability of the car, particularly at the very end of a run, probably the last maybe quarter of a run. I was getting, the car was getting too loose when I would get back to the throttle, and the very easy and quick fix to that is simply use less split in the rear tires and work other ways into the car to get it to rotate the way you need. So 50 pounds worked very well here for me, but you can certainly get away with more split in the rear springs. Just be ready for toward the end of a fuel run as the tires are more worn. Just be ready to pedal the throttle a little bit. Maybe you won't be able to get back full throttle quite as quickly. Tire settings, didn't spend a whole lot of time here. As always, I prefer to go a little bit on the lower end on tire pressure simply because I prefer the feel of that. However, plenty of room for adjustment here. 17 and 18 on the left side, 45 and 43 on the rights. But as I mentioned, plenty of room for adjustment there. Treat the tire pressures much like you treat the springs. Anytime we talk about increasing a spring will do a certain thing, then think of that in the tire pressure as well. Miscellaneous settings. Camber. This is an area where I spent a lot of time testing because I wanted to see how much camber you could get by with before it really started to affect your tire wear and stability of the car. The answer is I tested up as high as 4 degrees, +4 or -4, depending on the corner of the car. But even there, I did not get very much of any difference as far as the tire wear. So feel free to be more aggressive than what I'm showing here on the front cambers. I also tested as low as about 0.5, again, plus or minus depending on the corner of the car. But 0.5 also worked very well. Getting down that low at around, the closer you get to 0, the better the car feels, the more stable the car feels, the tighter the car feels, which makes sense. But also it started to take a little bit of speed out of the car. Not a lot, but it started to take a little bit of speed out of the car. However, I feel that this can be a good trade-off if you're really fighting stability in the car. If overall the car is just too loose, then maybe take a little bit of camber out of the front tires, and then sometimes that can be all you need to really give the car the feel you're looking for. But again, you can be very aggressive with the camber here and still not have to worry too much about affecting the tire wear. Moving on now to the front sway bar. Once again, maxed out at 2 inches, and that gives a lot of stability. It also stiffens up the platform of the car, so it reduces some of the roll that you would generally get out of the front end, particularly on corner entry and through the center. I like that feel of the car, but if you're looking for a little bit more roll out of the car, a little bit looser feel overall to the car, a little bit more body roll, then reduce the front sway bar by 1 to 2 clicks at a time. Just be careful about going too many clicks at one time. Too much adjustment here is a huge adjustment to the feel of the car. So make small adjustments, 1 to 2 clicks at a time, and then run several laps and see how it feels to you. The track bar. I wanted to get the track bar very high here because the track bar, the higher overall track bar, the more the car will rotate and the more speed you'll be able to carry through the corners, all things considered. Again, everything works along with the other settings in the setup, so nothing is standing alone. But overall, I wanted to use a higher track bar because these corners are pretty tight considering all the speed that we're carrying. So I needed the car to rotate pretty quickly through the center, so a higher track bar gives me that. I'm also using a higher left side number than right side number. The left side is used for corner entry, so the higher the left side track bar, the looser the car will be, the more it will want to rotate on corner entry. The more we drop the left side track bar, the tighter the car will be on corner entry. So I wanted all the help I could get on corner entry, getting this thing to rotate. But on the right side, I didn't need a whole lot of help getting the car to get through the center and rotate properly on the exit, so I dropped that number just a little bit. However, depending on how you drive the car, how aggressive you are with the throttle, you may want to increase or decrease the track bar based on what we've talked about. Brake bias, not really something I use at this track unless I'm in heavy traffic, but 80% brake bias, anywhere between about 75 and 80% generally works very well. However, if you're a person who likes to trail brake the car on corner entry, meaning that you might not use a lot of brake percentage-wise as you're heading into a corner, but you like to drag the brake just a little bit, then you might want to drop this number down closer to 70%, as that's going to help the car to rotate. It's going to help it turn on corner entry under braking. The more you increase the brake bias, the tighter the car is going to be under braking. Okay, moving on to the grill tape. I basically put this at 45%. It didn't overheat, so I didn't spend a whole lot of extra time on it. I'm sure you can probably be more aggressive than this. But again, the main thing I want to do when I give you guys a setup is not have the car overheating. So 45% was a very good middle ground for that. Wheel lock and steering offset are at my defaults of 10 degrees and 0.05. Wheel lock is used to really focus on the speed of the steering, how much wheel input you're going to have to give it. Increase this number and you're going to get quicker responses out of your steering. So if you're something like 15 to 18, 20, and so on, the car is going to react much quicker to your steering input. If you want more control and a slower feel from the steering wheel, then drop this number down to the 6 to 8 range, and you're going to have to use more wheel input, but it will feel a little bit better overall if that's what you're looking for. Steering offset is used to offset some of that pull to the left that the car has by design. So the higher the steering offset, the more it reduces that pull to the left, but if you get this number too high, then you can actually introduce a pull to the right on the straightaways, which is definitely not something that we want. Moving on finally to the gear settings. So first, second, and third gear are pretty much at what I would consider to be my defaults on the asphalt tracks, 3.2 and 1.4. So anywhere in that range is generally what I prefer when I'm going up through the gears, accelerating. The rear end ratio is really what we want to focus more on. Not sure why they used a fourth gear of 0.9. Generally in NASCAR, they use a 1.0 there. But regardless, the rear end ratio is at a 389, and that is pretty high on the RPM range. Doesn't quite get you to, or at least it doesn't put you on the rev limiter for an extended period of time. So there's room to go higher here. You can go up around 4.0, maybe a little bit higher, depending on what speed you're running. But the higher the number on rear end ratio, the more RPMs you're going to turn. And of course, ultimately, you're going to hit the rev limiter. So it's all about whether you're looking for early run speed, qualifying type speed, or if you're looking for more long run speed as the tires wear out and the speeds fall off. But 389 worked very well for me. Just also keep in mind that whenever you're adjusting the rear end ratio, this also adjusts the handling of the car. The higher the number you use on the rear end ratio, the more RPMs, the looser the car will be under throttle. The lower number on the rear end ratio, the lower the RPMs and the tighter the car will be under throttle. So now that takes care of the Cup car. As I mentioned earlier, the Xfinity and Trucks are really very similar to me in feel, but they're a little bit tighter. So how would I look to loosen up the car? Immediately, I would come over to initially to the wedge and the front weight and look to reduce these numbers by a half to a full percent, and that will usually get me pretty close. And from there, I can dial in other things such as maybe a little bit of right rear tire pressure to free up the car. And also, I would generally come in and make a few adjustments to the track bar. In this case, I might increase the right side track bar to once again help free up the car. So that's going to do it for today. Thank you so much for joining me, and stay tuned for more NASCAR Heat 5.